Dear audience, esteemed panelists, honorable guests, honorable trustee members of the BOT IOB, respected faculty members, and beloved students. Welcome back to our next panel discussion after the break. Our panel is Well-Being, Building Bridges Between Development and Conservation for Human Resilience. Now, I would like to humbly request Vasumati Srikant, Chief Operating Officer, Prism Institute, Canada. We have Srikant Mangalam, founder and president, Public Risk Management Institute. We have Dr. Viva Dhawan, Director General, the Energy and Resources Institute, India. We also have Beth Allgood, founder, One Nature USA. We have Thobile Chitandan, Network Co-Lead Wellbeing Economy Alliance, South Africa. I would like to call you all in front of the stage and sit here. We'll start our session within few minutes. Thank you.
Now you can hear me? Yeah, okay, okay. Yeah, so welcome to all the uh, audience here and our esteemed panelists. We'll first hear a video message from Beth Allgood.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I regret that I couldn't be there in person, but I am really, really honored to be among the incredible panelists and guests that you have this year. So I'll dive right in. I am Beth Allgood. I'm the founder and president of One Nature. And our mission at One Nature is to advance the interconnection of wildlife and human well-being so that animals, people, and nature can flourish together. We do that through partnering with international conservation organizations to bring a data-driven focus on human well-being and happiness to their wildlife conservation efforts. This leads to improved financial, programmatic, and community outcomes of the projects. And then we use the results of these community projects and the data, along with other collaborative research, to advocate for transformational change. So I imagine that through the course of the conference, a lot of people are talking about the need to shift away from a GDP only metric to one that is broader and more holistic and inclusive, especially on a global level. And so I'm not going to dive into that too deeply. I'm going to focus on the need to look at the local level as well. This economic productivity approach is ingrained in conservation approaches for decades, and it's often at odds with the community's values where we work. We believe that without deeply understanding and supporting community well-being from the community's perspective and based on their values, projects will ultimately fail. They will fail to reverse the extinction crisis. They'll fail to secure environmental sustainability. They won't support social justice and human thriving in communities who are stewarding the world's remaining wildlife and wild places. And they really deserve global support in doing so. So just wanted to share a quick roadmap on where we're going in the next 5 minutes or so. We've already done introduction and the why. So we'll talk a little bit about how the definition of well-being, how you measure the value of nature and wildlife, and the well-being in conservation approach, and then end with some recommendations. So what is well-being? There has been research for many, many years about how to define well-being and what encompasses, what domains are included in well-being. And we like this definition, the combination of feeling good and functioning well. These are a selection of the domains that are generally understood to be part of a holistic well-being approach: life satisfaction, psychological health, physical health, of course, isn't there, but it should be, community, culture, education, environment, government, economy. We can add spirituality. And these are kind of typically understood to be the domains of well-being. And then how do you measure the value of nature? There are different approaches. The instrumental value approach is a pretty traditional economic approach of measuring the importance and value of nature. And that is what directly benefits people, basically. What from nature is benefiting people, including food and energy and raw materials, that sort of thing. The intrinsic value is the inherent worth of nature, independent of people. So those two values are sometimes seen to be at odds with each other. And that's where the third way of valuing, the relational value, is really important, because that values the connection between people and nature and includes material and non-material values like culture and spirituality. And then with wildlife, when nature is specifically interested in understanding how to holistically value wildlife, I think that's where many gaps are in research and in practice, actually. And it can be really challenging to isolate the value of wildlife from the value of nature as a whole, of course. It's not very easy to experiment on, unlike companion animals, where we know petting a dog can lower your blood pressure, that kind of thing. It's difficult, more difficult to extract that idea of wildlife being valuable in different ways than an ecosystem value. And in many times, the economic value of nature is of wildlife is more around the parts and products of wildlife than the kind of living, breathing, thriving wildlife. But the well-being of many human communities is directly dependent on local wildlife, and the survival of wildlife population depends on the stewardship of local communities. So, what are the elements of this well-being and conservation approach? I'll start with the measurement. So typically in conservation projects, we do measure well-being of communities through objective measures that are often decided upon by the conservation organization or the funding organization as indicators that the community is doing well. These objective indicators is information that's observed about the community. Subjective indicators are not commonly used, and that is information about the subject's experience from the subject's perspective. And at One Nature, we believe that both of those are really critical to really establishing a well-being baseline, where the community is now, and then monitoring it over time. This can provide reliable information about how the community is feeling and some early warning signs about unanticipated challenges, either from the project or even in the external environment, but that the project needs to know about to really address community needs. We've, One Nature and the Happiness Alliance, developed a peer-reviewed, validated community well-being index, which we call Wild Happiness. It assesses life satisfaction, the many domains of well-being, and the community's feelings about wildlife and nature. Understanding non-economic values like culture and spiritual values is so important. We recently collaborated with partners on a research project where we looked at 10 case studies where existing spiritual and cultural connections between communities and wildlife was supported and strengthened while they were addressing pretty intense human-wildlife conflict and other community challenges. And that was wonderful. We had 10 case studies from communities all over the world, really. It's really good. Community ownership is the last piece, and this can be enhanced through deep listening of the community and their perspective, establishing this well-being baseline like we talked about, and then sharing the results with the community. It is their data and they should have it for decision making. Participatory planning and capacity building with these well-being values and priorities in mind, and then monitoring and evaluating the project using this well-being tool or other subjective and objective measures of well-being to really be included as a critical measure of success. If you're succeeding in the long run, the community understands and appreciates the project and owns it. Right. So, final slide here is our recommendation. So we recommend that this approach be adopted and that the results can generate data for decision makers to better understand the value and connection communities have to wildlife and nature, in addition to supporting the individual communities where this approach is taken, of course. And ultimately, that we can all develop more socially just and sustainable policies and funding that increases human thriving, protects species and habitats, and improves long-term economic sustainability. So again, I'm so grateful to be invited to present and for being part of this forum. And my contact information is here, and I really invite collaboration and conversation at this really important time in our relationship with the earth. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was a really good message from Beth Allgood. And yeah, continuing on that, we've had an informative and thought-provoking forum over the last 2.5 days with discussion on the negative impacts of climate change and ecological degradation on the lives and livelihoods, and the challenges of repurposing an economic system that is able to mitigate these harmful effects through a net zero agenda. As you've heard time and again, the brunt of the negative impact is felt by the vulnerable communities here in Bangladesh, the rural communities who are engaged in farming, and the indigenous communities of the entire Eastern Himalayan region. They find that their livelihoods are constantly being threatened by the forces of nature, the shrinking forest, and the extreme climate events. In this session, just as Beth had indicated that we need to have a collaborative approach, we are going to expand our perspective and try and change the lens through which we are going to look at both economic development and conservation. Instead of looking at ecological conservation through a siloed approach, just simply like through the reduction of a fossil fuel dependence and carbon sequestration, we are going to look at it more through the lens of well-being of communities. Yesterday we had Professor Das Gupta. He said that we need to change the grammar of economics if we want to deal with the twin problems of economic impoverishment and ecological degradation. Another theme that we have heard several times has been to include local and traditional knowledge and involve communities in the conservation efforts by making both the community and social well-being as the focus. The isolated sectors of economic development and ecological conservation can find common ground to work in a collaborative manner that achieves balanced outcomes on both fronts, instead of looking at each other as competing interests. So now, let us turn to our esteemed panel of experts who will throw some light on these challenges and expand on how focus on well-being can create the bridge between conservation and economic development for human resilience. So I'll first invite our panelists to say a few things about themselves and what the work they are doing. Uh, I think we can start with Tobil Chittenden.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Wonderful to be with you online. Unfortunately, yeah, I'm not there in person. I would have loved to be there. I would have loved to participate in person and connect with you all. But I'm glad for technology that I get to connect online at least. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Tobile Chittenden. As you've mentioned, I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So my role there is really as a network co-lead. I'm part of this alliance in terms of growing and showcasing, amplifying, and connecting the incredible organizations across the globe, and showcasing the work that they are doing towards economic systems change. A part of that as well, I'm part of a community-based organization based in the inner city of Johannesburg. It's called Makers Valley. And this is where I get to work at a grassroots local level towards a well-being economy at a local level. So I love the fact that I get to do both. I'm working downstream, on the ground, grassroots, in a community, but also upstream in terms of actual working towards economic systems change at a broader and international global level. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a mother. I'm also not an economist or an academic. And that's what I love about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, is that we really believe, as you were speaking about, collaboration and making sure that this conversation, and Beth was alluding to this as well, is multi-level. It's a whole of society approach. And so I'm really excited that these conversations are not just at the top tier level, but it embraces all kinds of people from the whole of society. So even though I'm not an academic or professional economist, I really am privileged and honored to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobil. That was really refreshing. Yes, it's not just the economists who get to decide what happens. We do have to have a whole of the economy approach. I agree. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Vibha Dhawan to introduce herself and say a few words.
Hi, good afternoon. Like Tobil said, I would have loved to be present in person, but let's compromise with the virtual. You are able to see us, but we are not able to see you, so it's the unfortunate part. I work with the Energy and Resources Institute. Basically, I'm an agriculture biotechnologist, but Terry, as an organization, you all must be aware of, we are working in the field of sustainability. And rather, what you are talking about, well-being versus the economic development, we started talking about this many years back, rather 1997, when India completed 50 years of its independence. We really looked into what are the gains and what are the losses. And really speaking, I'll put it this way, that we are living in a dynamic world, and therefore even our priorities changes every year. And what we are looking today, or what we have realized after doing many mistakes, is that if you want to be healthy, if you really want to grow, it is essential for you to take care of your nature, biodiversity. And therefore, for your own survival, for your own well-being, it is extremely important that you look at the ecosystem around you. So I'll talk more about it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. Now we'll have Shrikant Mangalam to say a few words.
Thank you, Vasumati, and good afternoon to you all, and good afternoon to our panelists. I have the fortune of being here in person and visiting this beautiful country for the first time. So thank you for the invitation. As Vasumati said, my name is Shrikant Mangalam, and collectively we run a not-for-profit institute in Canada called Public Risk Management Institute. Our area of interest and focus is basically to try and understand risks to social outcomes such as SDGs, and create a collaboration platform to help achieve those social outcomes in the form of SDGs through science and evidence. And the way we have been doing it is we've been working at primarily national and macro levels with governments and through regulations and policies, and enabling a policy environment that supports the achievement of sustainable development goals in general. As much as we completely concur with a lot of what has been said about how economic development is done in a very narrow fashion and doesn't incorporate aspects of well-being, we think that a right and correct approach to implementing SDGs is a path towards focusing on a holistic approach to addressing well-being. And our interest is very much on those lines. And I look forward to sharing some of our thoughts, our thinking in this space, and the work that we're doing through this session this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you, Shrikant. So as we know, our topic here is how well-being can create a bridge between conservation and economic development for human resilience. So let's start off by asking how you would define well-being, and how do you distinguish between individual well-being and community well-being, and how do you see this distinction between the two affect decisions on economic development and ecological conservation in your experience? So I guess I would, Tobil, you can go ahead first with this.
Okay, great. So yes, I didn't really explain around the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, the organization that I'm part of. It's an alliance, a global alliance that is bringing organizations that are working towards economic systems change together. And so we obviously really passionate about what a well-being means for the individual and as well for the community. And for us, I think it's really, really, really interlinked. It's very hard to distinguish, because I think that's the whole point, is that we're needing to see this as much more interconnected. So obviously the definition of well-being refers to quality of life. It refers to the flourishing of people and all people. It refers to the sustainability of the planet. And one of the things that we refer to often is the 5 needs, the we all needs. And it's saying that we all need certain things for our well-being. So we all need fairness, which speaks to justice. We all need nature, a restored and safe and natural world for life for all. We need participation, active participation, where citizens are engaged in their communities and in the economy. We need connection, a sense of belonging. We need dignity, where everyone has enough to be able to live in comfort and security and happiness. So all of these things for us kind of speak to what a well-being economy or well-being is. And I think the economy part is what we are obviously as an organization speaking to, because we believe that the economic system is linked to all of those needs. And as a South African, I have to speak about Ubuntu. So this is a South African term that means I am because we are. And it sometimes becomes very overused, but I think it really speaks to this definition of well-being that really encompasses the interdependence of humans on another. It's this acknowledgement that we have a responsibility towards our fellow humans. So it's actually speaking to the individual is nothing really without the collective. And that's why I'm saying the collective and the individual well-being are very, very interlinked. So one of our presidents, our famous presidents, Nelson Mandela, spoke about it being the profound sense that we are human only through the humanity of others. And so everything that we're trying to achieve, that work that we do, the way that we live, has to encompass the way that other people live. And I'm really passionate about this, because sometimes if we only focus on the individual well-being, we'll lose the fact, and we've seen a rise of individualism in the last couple of decades. And I fear that it's making us more disconnected from one another, and it's allowing us to be less empathetic. It's allowing us to just lose sense of the realities of this world. And so, even though I'm sitting here in South Africa, you are all the way across in Bangladesh, I still feel connected to you as a human, because this is how we need to embrace economic development, is this interconnectedness at a local level, but at a global level. And one famous economist, Tim Jackson, he really refers to Ubuntu as a philosophy that supports the changes that are necessary to create a future that is economically and environmentally sustainable. So at the heart of it all, I think Ubuntu for me is the way that I would answer this question. It's about the intimate connectedness between individual and community well-being. And I think that plays a role on how we embrace economic development as well as ecological conservation. Because if we realize and have this lens that everything is interconnected, and that lens is used in the way that we make policy decisions, is used in the way that we think about our connection to nature and the decisions that we make on a daily basis, the way that we conduct our business, if we really see that interconnectedness in our day-to-day decision making, we'll be able to see a more sustainable planet and more sustainable economy.
Thank you, Tobil. I really like the saying, I am because we are. That is so true. And now, Dr. Vibha.
Yeah, thank you so much. And in fact, the wheel had said everything, so it has really made my job very difficult. Well, when we talk of well being, I'll say at an individual level, what we are looking at, that am I comfortable, healthy, and happy? And to achieve these three things, it is that somewhere, many a times, I look into the shorter term goals. I want to be comfortable, I want a big house, I want air conditioned house, and therefore I forget about what impact I'm leaving on this planet. Am I excessively using the resources that were given to me, or those are available to me because my parents and grandparents and great grandparents were far more sensible in terms of conserving nature? We had tradition of living very close to the nature, and is what we are today talking about circular economy. Without using this term, we were practicing it. Nothing was thrown. And if you look back, the way we were brought up when we were young, we never, everything was reusable. You will only buy the refills for the pen, and you will not buy the entire pen, and once it's done, you throw away. You take water, which is the mineral water, which is actually, it is more of a sort of RO water. The way you are misusing resources, you are first removing everything from the water, and then you take pills to take care of the minerals that your body requires. You think of eating the usual wheat flour that we eat every day. So first, we want absolute fine one, and then we add choker to it. So therefore, the short term is what gives me comfort, and I forget what I'm doing to the nature, how it's going to impact me. So this is at the individual level. Now, very rightly said that individual well-being is very different from the community well-being. With so many negatives of COVID, it has taught us one thing, and that is we only have one planet to live and everything to be shared. So even if a disease originate in one part of the globe, it is going to have impact at the global level. The other thing which it has taught us, and let's look into the numbers. It is that whether it is Africa, whether it is Asia, in spite of such large population pressures, We managed it much better than many developed countries. What is the main difference? There are two different main. One of the main differences, we eat healthy food. We eat fresh food. Our food includes plants which gives us immunity, and that immunity is very important. You go to the, I should say, the tribals, they never go to doctors, and if you ask the average lifespan, it is much higher than us. You look at a tribal person who is 90-year plus, they are far healthier than a 90-year-old person in a city. Where are they getting that? That is from the plants. That is from the biodiversity that exists in their area, plus their lifestyles that they follow. So, therefore, what we are looking at the moment is that if you want to remain healthy, it is very important for you to have a community which is healthy as well, and not just the community, the entire ecosystem if you want to survive. It is when we save the planet, I don't agree with that statement. The planet will do very well without us. It will do much better, and we have seen it during COVID time. So it is, we are very selfish. We are trying to save or conserve things only for our own survival. So we have to take that in mind. And as uh, Taubil mentioned, in Indian saying also, there is one thing which in every ritual festival we pray to the God that please do good to everyone on this earth. Sabka bhala karo Bhagwan. So it is basically that if we have a healthy community, then only we can be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. Now I'll ask Shrikant Mangalam.
Uh, Thank you. And as Dr. Vibha mentioned, it's very hard to follow the act that the bill started off by sharing what her definition of well-being is, and I can't but not just agree with her, but totally wholeheartedly support that definition. What I will do is I'll give my perspective on um, what I think needs to be done, as Dr. Vibha mentioned, in the short and the interim term. There's a saying that goes, what gets measured gets managed. And sadly, what is being measured today is not what is appropriate. It's not what is relevant. It's not what is adequate. And as a result, we need to change the narrative of what gets measured. And aspirationally, I think what needs to get measured is what Tobil has stated. And I feel that there is a journey that we have to undertake to shift the conversation, the narrative, from what is being measured purely in terms of economic terms to what is being measured in a more holistic way as to what well-being can be and should be as we evolve ourselves. And I think in that context, the shift has to be from measuring well-being, which today, for the most part, is focused on individual well-being, to what should be a community or collective well-being. And in that context, I think there are opportunities for which we can shift the way well-being is measured in a manner that we are able to achieve those aspirational goals that the Tubil is set. So my point being that there is an aspirational aspect to well-being, but today's world is not operated on that aspirational aspect. Today's world is operated on a measurement that's very limited in scope, and we have to shift that pendulum from where it is today to where we would like it to be. And that shift has to move from an individual well-being to a collective well-being. And for that, we have to start thinking about what collective well-being means in most practical terms, towards where we want to become in aspirational terms in the future. So.
Thank you, Shrikant. So now that we have several definitions of well-being, but which come together in the overall context, I would like to ask you, we often find that the analysis on economic growth does not include an assessment of the impacts on the well-being of the community. So, what are the ways in which an analytical assessment of the impacts on community well-being caused by the development sector activities and effective conservation practices lead to change in the way that growth is perceived? Sorry. Tobil, would you want to take it first?
Okay, sure. So I think my two panelists would definitely be able to give a more analytical response. And I think the work that we do at a Wellbeing Economy Alliance is really to look at this question that you're speaking about. To go beyond GDP is often the term or expression that we use, because as my colleague was just saying right now, GDP has been the predominant measure of success, and we're saying that is too narrow. It is not really measuring what matters, as explained before. So there's been so many scientists and academics and governments that have really started to look beyond GDP. And I must say there are hundreds of different indicators and different assessments that can be used. And I think it's really, really important to take these seriously and start incorporating them. So various ones are the Human Development Index. We have the Stiglitz report, which is also a dashboard of indicators. As you've been speaking about, the SDGs are very, very well known across the globe. And I think it helps this interconnectedness between people from different nations to have this overarching set of indicators. The OECD has Better Life Index, the UNDP have the Human Development Index. So there are so many different ones. Bhutan has been really well known for their gross national happiness index, and that's been one of the game changers and examples that we've seen. Living Standards Frameworks by New Zealand, the Wellbeing Monitor in the Netherlands, the National Performance Framework in Scotland, and the Quality of Life Framework in Canada. And there are many more. And I think it's great to have all these indicators, but what I think is sometimes overwhelming is to perhaps have too many. And so there's a need for some work around coherency and also bringing some of these indicators together. But also it's not a one size fits all. So you do have to look at different contexts, cultures, and dynamics of each country and understand what types of indicators are going to work best. And what Beth was referring to in her video, I just loved, because it really connects with me as I work in a grassroots community, is how do we actually create this community stewardship or ownership, or this sense of active participation. So it's one thing having this top-down approach where a government says, we're going to use this framework or assessment to measure the well-being. But what if the people of that country or community don't resonate? They don't even understand sometimes the terms and the jargon that is used in these indicators. So who are we measuring it for really? Is it just for the governments to look good? Or is it actually for the people to have some buy-in and to actually believe that they can participate in these frameworks and indicators? So that's something I'm really passionate about. And in our local community, we don't even say the word well-being indicator. Just that word, that sentence is difficult for people that don't use English as their first language to understand. So we really use some simple conversational language. And one of the things that we use in the Makers Valley is, what is a good life really? And how do we get there? And this is a bottom-up kind of forming of indicators that resonate with that local community. Because we first ask, what is a good life? And the surface conversation can start off very surface level. But when you put that word really, when people start to go deep, you start to see these things that we spoke about in terms of the definition of well-being come up, in terms of nature, in terms of spirituality, in terms of connectedness to others. Those are the things that that come up, and it's people saying from their hearts, what do they believe is well-being, not a government telling them what well-being is. And that's the first thing. It really then connects people to say, actually, I really want to see this happen for my community. They invested in what that looks like, and they have a vision for what they want the future of their community to look like. And that often really involves a clean and safe environment, a sustainable environment, an environment where nature is looked after. Those things come up at a grassroots level. And sometimes it's so hard to, at a grassroots level, speak about climate justice and social justice. And we often say that climate justice is social justice, and that they're very interconnected. And when you ask that question, they start to see that interconnectedness between the individual as well as nature. And when you ask, how do we get there? What is a good life really? And how do we get there? We start to see this bottom-up approach of setting indicators or setting goals, and actually then coming up with their own kind of measurements or tools to start tracking that progress of where are we now and how are we going to get to that vision. And what's beautiful about that is that the community then also becomes citizen-led researchers or scientists themselves. They get to track their progress. And instead of having these external academics or scientists coming into a community, they actually feel that they can track and be stewards of their own progress. So that's something that I know I'm going to keep having this thread throughout my conversation around the local level participation. I think it's so, so important in terms of looking at frameworks, indicators, how do we ensure buy-in? Because what I'm finding is that this movement, we are at such a critical point for climate justice. We have to ensure that the local people are part of it, they understand it, they feel motivated to be part of this thing. So as long as there's this divide between, the top tier and the rest of humanity, we're not going to see change as fast as we're needing to. So I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to emphasize there are many different indicators, but what I would love to see is a grassroots kind of community building of these indicators and frameworks from their own language and definitions.
Thank you, Tabil. So essentially, to summarize, you're saying there is a need for coherence. We have too many indicators. We need relevance, and we need input from the communities themselves, bottom up instead of top down. Okay. Now, yes. So let's go to Dr. Vibha.
Same question?
Yes, same question. I will
Okay.
go around.
Yeah, let's have different perspective on the same, and let's look into, like, when we talk of development sector, from the government side, from the country side, most of the time it is that what kind of infrastructure are we building there? If even you need connectivity, you need to have roads, and therefore you have to somewhere cut down the trees and the natural paths which were otherwise available. You also, because of the projects of national interest, you also have to widen highways, and that is where many a times you also have to acquire land. Farmers sometimes are very happy because they get a lot of money, and so temporarily they are very happy with the development that is taking place in their region. And it depends, like some of them, they utilize this money very effectively, and therefore perhaps their entire generation, or they come to the next level of growth. In many instances they burn out that money, and the little land which was earlier available to them, that is also gone. What we are also missing on, that on the name of development, their life, the miseries of their life, they are becoming more and more. Let's look at the mountain areas. those of us who are in the plains and they have money to go, they love to go to the hills during summer season. Those are eco-fragile areas. Immediate development is that lots and lots of resorts will be built there. The meager water resource which is available to the communities today will be used by the hoteliers. The trees which were earlier, in a way, they were stopping rainwater or floods in that area, you have cut down on that, which is causing over a period of time landslides. So that will become a major problem in times to come. This is one model of growth, that this is immediate, you will see the results, but in the long run the community is going to suffer. The other model which is now coming up is, can we have a sort of ecotourism? Because those of us who wants to go, we also want to enjoy the actual ecology of the area. We want to enjoy the village life. Maybe that, because then it is in a particular area, it's a small house which is accommodating us versus a multi-storied hotel. So the growth is comparatively small, but it is far more sustainable. So if we really want to survive, we are looking for a growth which basically takes care over a long term, and it is ecologically, it is something which is sustainable. The other thing, even on short term, on medium term, what is happening is that many of these peoples, they are in real term becoming poorer. What they are having today, like you are, or those, while we talk of poor communities or ecology or economically disadvantageous section of the society, yes, they don't have hard money currency in their hand, but they eat much better. They have trees in their backyard, they grow organic food, they have pesticide free, and therefore their health remains much better than those of us who are living in slums. Because there the sanitation, they suffer from hygiene, sanitation, availability of healthy food, because then it is only the grains that they are eating, they are only meeting calorific needs, they are not meeting the nutritional security. Their immunity, if they are living in those kind of conditions in the cities, then it is their immunity levels again are very low. So even in midterm they become loser. So what we essentially require is that we have to look into development and weigh it. The physical in development is to be weighed against the losses in nature if we have made any. And I'll tell you about a very interesting study that Terry had done in the past, and much before people actually started talking about it, and it was called Green India 2047. So when India completed 50 years of its independence, everyone was talking about this is what we have gained. And we brought out a study saying that yes, development is essential, it's key to success. But there are other ways of ensuring that development takes place, but in a sustainable way. And if you continue business as usual on your first 50 years, you may not even see 100th year. So you have to do development in a different way. And that is the message. Green is not always expensive. It's a change in mindset. It is your sensitivity. There are few things without which you can do. For 1 kilometer, I don't have to take my car out. I can drive that 1 kilometer. But and I also have to look into, it's not always if you're creating highways you're doing injustice. No, because ultimately you're saving GHG emissions. Few years back we said don't cut the trees, but we also now know that a tree, a 30-year-old tree fixes less CO2 compared to a 10-year-old tree. So regeneration of forest is equally important. So we have to work out models that are sustainable, that are green and that will ensure that humanity remains on this planet forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vibha. So essentially, we need to be looking at long-term and not short-term solutions at the cost of our ecology. Shrikant, would you like to add some words?
Very briefly, I will just build on what Tobil basically mentioned, particularly on the indicators, and I completely concur and agree with her that while it's very positive to see the shift from just looking at GDPs and economic indicators to other forms of indicators, they're predominantly in almost all cases at the macro level, at national levels. And so at best, they're aggregate indicators that don't necessarily reflect the diversity and inequities that exist in systems at local levels. And at worst, they are nothing other than just a bunch of numbers which provide no meaning and value in terms of designing interventions, particularly with respect to the disadvantaged communities. So what our interests as an organization has been to exactly do what Tobil has been advocating for, which is looking at a bottom-up approach to generating the necessary evidence and knowledge around well-being, both in terms of definition and the way it's being measured, and then creating the right set of tools and platforms to empower the communities to be able to utilize that information and knowledge to make sure that decisions and investments that are being made are made keeping those factors in mind. So there are three things that we are really interested in. Is one, to create the right tools and platforms for communities to be able to engage in this process of generating the right set of information and evidence and tapping into local wisdoms, not just on their state of well-being, but the interconnectedness in terms of all the factors that affect them. The second part is to create the right governance framework and the empowerment framework where communities not only believe that they own the data, but they have the mechanism and the ability to control that data and information that is being generated through in decision making. And three, which is probably the most vital thing to do in a practical context, is to change the narrative amongst policymakers and investors to start focusing more on a bottom-up approach to making their decisions as opposed to a macro approach. So institutions like the World Bank and the IFC, that they have to change. They have to have a radical change in the way they're currently approaching investment decisions, etc. And I think that has to be done. And the only way that can happen is by empowering the communities with the right set of tools and platforms to be able to have that conversation. So.
Thank you, Shrikant. So it's the governance framework and right tools for measurement and a bottom-up approach that would help change the perspective and make sure that what we are talking about gets implemented in a practical manner. So going on, how do you think that prioritizing people and planet over these traditional economic growth models can lead to climate change mitigation and socioeconomic justice of affected populations? And how can involving communities in the conservation efforts lead to lasting and sustainable solutions? Tobil, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. So there's so much that's happening, just climate-related disasters. South Africa, just like many parts of Bangladesh, have gone through severe flooding, landslides. I think it's at the point now where people are really starting to switch on just their awareness around climate change, which is, it's disappointing that it's got to this level, but at the same time, I'm so glad that people are starting to wake up. So the one thing, again, going back to the well-being approaches, I think there's so many amazing approaches. So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we see ourselves as a picnic blanket. There's lots of different approaches that can be used, but once you look at a local level, you'll start to see what actually works for that community or place or city. And so I think what we are starting to see quite widespread is circular economy principles in terms of manufacturing and production. I think a circular economy is one of those big things that we're seeing in terms of mitigating climate change. We're starting to see community-based renewable energy generation, and that's something exciting that I'm starting to see in various communities. And yeah, we just want to see participatory planning processes. And again, one of the things that I think was interesting coming to this participatory approach, and I think this is part of a well-being economy where we're saying if you are prioritizing people and planet, speak to people, speak to the people about what they are noticing in the planet, because they are on the ground and seeing what's around them. And I just wanted to share a quick example of the Maori. So I can't remember exactly which report, but there's so many amazing reports and studies on the Maori and the infrastructure and the issue that they're facing of the rising sea levels. And obviously the Maori cultural infrastructure is very much situated in areas that are vulnerable to flooding, to rising sea levels, etc. And what they're starting to see is actually the question around, okay, we understand that there's a huge issue here, that there's an impact on the way that we live, on our culture and our practices. But what was interesting for me is they asked a question, how might we see this problem differently? How might we see that this could be ecologically restored into wetlands, this area that we're in now, instead of seeing it as obviously it is a bit of a crisis and it's impacting the way that we live, but how do we emerge out of this and start to adapt the way that we live and start to see this as a wetland? And I think that was really interesting for me is that, and I think Dr. Viva was mentioning it earlier, is that for decades, generations, we've seen indigenous tribes and cultures adapt over and over again to climate change. And this is what I would really like to see is how do we, when we say we're prioritizing people and planet, look at that indigenous knowledge. I mean, from Africa's point of view, we're speaking a lot about decolonization, and obviously across the globe, we're starting to actually validate that indigenous knowledge, which was so much, for the past decades, we're told it's not valid, it's not important, it's not seen as a viable approach. And I think it's time now, as Dr. Viva was mentioning earlier, to look at some of these indigenous practices, approaches, and learn from them in order to mitigate the climate change and the crisis that we're in now. So that for me is the most interesting part, but obviously, as I've mentioned, there's lots of different ways that we can approach this climate crisis mitigation. So I'll allow my other colleagues to respond further.
Yes. So yeah, that's so true. What is a crisis can also be used by the community as an opportunity to do something better. Just as you said, the wetlands are a good example. Dr. Vidha, you would like to add something to that?
Yeah, very rightly mentioned that what I would again like to say is that even the countries, they will have to move to people-centric climate smart development, which is possible. And of course, one concept which I'm sure the world is going to follow is that of life, which was announced by Prime Minister of India, and that is lifestyles for environment. So it can be done, and but then what happens is that you and I, we really don't calculate what our actions are going to cause to the planet. And it is that I always say that each of us is going to be getting impacted by the climate change. Even the richest person on this planet again has to breathe the air which is available, will have to drive car, breathe air which is available. So all that, to the poorest of the poor, we all, of course, the intensity of what we are going to suffer is going to vary. Therefore, when we are looking at use of reducing the use of fossil fuel and going more for renewables, that should be prioritized, and decarbonization is something again which can be carried out by each one of us. And somewhere it is that the cleaner practices, if someone is following that and taking the example of Bangladesh, India, and most countries in this region, we depend quite a bit on agriculture. Now, can we make it more cleaner? It is not just to feed people on this planet, it is also that it is safe food. We spray less of pesticides and even use less of fertilizers, because food security and nutritional security is something which is definitely required. And the way we are going, the use of carbon footprint, the carbon footprint with the new practices is going up and up. So we need to reduce that. Water reuse, how do we do that? So all those things are extremely important. And therefore, it is that sustainability comes first. What I want to say is economic growth will come on its own. Take care of the nature. It's going to give you back. But if you spoil nature, perhaps it will go beyond repair, and therefore we'll suffer. So, therefore, somewhere it is that economics will come on its own. The moment your crop, your soils becomes healthier, your plants will become healthier, you will get more output. And in a way, if the temperature increases, your own productivity is going to go down and your energy bills are going to go up. So you can't afford that. And it will become hotter and hotter planet. So take care of it before it becomes too late. Thank you.
So take care of the planet and the planet will take care of you. Shrikant, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I'll just go back to the point that I've been making through the session is what gets measured gets managed. And I think that I believe in that message very strongly. And so therefore there is a need to create the mechanism by which communities can start measuring and reporting on data and information that's reflective of them. You talked about decolonization. There's a need for decolonizing data. There's a need for democratizing data at community levels and leveraging the power of data, which is where the direction we need to go. So the response to that question is, if we are able to measure at community levels, measure relevant information, I think that will go a long way in generating the necessary influence to bring about change.
Thank you, Shrikant. So measuring what is being conserved and what economic development we have, both of them count. So I think over the last 2 days we have talked about how conservation is important for the health of the planet and for economics as such. But we have found that most of the time they look at each other as adversaries. It's always been economic development at the expense of conservation, or some of the conservation activists do not look at what the impacts are to the community. So how do you think the well-being lens will help to bridge these two different forces together and work together to work for a common good? How do you think involvement of communities for both economic development and conservation hand in hand will work for a better planet? Tobil?
Yeah, I'm giving it a little bit of thought. I think, yeah, they go hand in hand. And this is really at the heart of what we're saying, is that we can't look at these. That's part of the problem that we've seen so far. In countries like South Africa, even though we have economic growth, the inequality levels, for example, are the highest it's ever been, and it's the highest in the world. And it's leading to insane levels of crime and protest and frustration and civil disobedience. And I think we're speaking to that just now. I think Dr. Viba was saying that you can't see these things separately, because if the people are crumbling, if there's rising inequality, it doesn't matter that the highest, the richest are increasing their wealth, they're still impacted by the injustice that is happening in society. So we can no longer separate the two. They have to go hand in hand. And public-private partnerships, we speak about obviously community involvement, and I've been speaking to that often, is that we need a whole of society approach. And something that we're very passionate about it, we all, even if we are putting out a paper, an academic paper, or anything that we do, our strategy, we are very passionate about a participatory process. And what we find is that because we have this westernized culture of we have to do it now, we have to get the output out, there's this kind of this drive to be the fastest or the pioneer in the market or the first to market is a term that we often hear. How do we actually change that mindset of saying, let's slow down and let's measure what matters most? Because that's when we will actually be able to incorporate all these practices that we want to see. So it is a slower approach. One of our, we created a policy design guide, for example, that provides a beautiful, step-by-step process for local policymakers of how they can incorporate a well-being economy at a local level. We didn't just create that output of just here's the paper. It took 70 organizations to participate in providing information and thoughts and critique and come back. And it was a back and forth process in order to get that outcome. And we're doing this at a micro level, just within our organization, but this is what we're wanting to see at a macro level, that we need more participatory processes in order for a real coming together of various stakeholders, because we see this term being used, public-private partnerships. We see collaboration as a very sexy term that is used everywhere, but it's not as sexy as as it sounds. You have to do the work in order to bring people together, and it does take some time. And another thing that I think is an interesting example is in Wales, they have the Future Generations Act and the Future Generations Commissioner. And the person that's been in place is Sophie Howe. She's been the person, and I think it is good to have that intermediary between government and the people. She is the commissioner looking to ensure accountability. So what the government says, they are accountable to the people. And also, if they are planning anything or any decision making, she looks at that with a long-term view and impact on people and planet. And so I think that approach is really interesting. So as much as we need to have more policies that integrate participatory process, we also need levels in terms of government and in the private sector, people that can place governments and the private sector to account to ensure that they are saying or doing what they actually say. And I love that Wales example, because they're really looking at they've got 7 well-being goals, and every single one of those goals, they've got prosperous Wales, they've got a resilient Wales, they've got a healthier Wales, they've got cohesive communities in Wales, they've got beautiful goals. But the Commissioning Act, or the Future Generations Commissioner, has to ensure that all the public bodies and the private bodies are thinking about how each decision is impacting on those goals. So I'll stop there. I think we need more public-private collaboration and participatory design, co-creation, but also people or vehicles, mechanisms that can hold these players to account.
Thank you, Tobil. That's very, very clear. Dr. Vibha, would you like to add a few words?
Yeah, well, I'll just shift the discussion to what is also happening at the international level, and that is at COP. So the recently concluded COP that brought out a sort of, I'll say, commitment that there should be loss and damage fund created. And the countries which have suffered the most due to climate change and not really were part of causing the climate change, there should be some funds available for their well-being. Now, that is, of course, we'll have to see how it shapes up. But another thing which is becoming important is that of carbon markets or carbon credits. So, somewhere it is definitely going to help countries like Bangladesh, India, and others to, because we are blessed with a lot of sunshine, we have a lot of biodiversity, rich forests. So, and our economy also is quite agrarian. So, over there, if we introduce, say, growing trees, and we also give money or compensate, financially compensate the farmer for his labor by growing these trees. So it becomes a sort of win win situation, because at the micro level, at the regional level, they are getting free or better air by through those trees. You're getting money from a third country, a developed part of the world, to buy the carbon sink or the tree. You also sell either the fruit or the wood. So it becomes some sort of financial compensation to the farmer, and at the same time, they are getting better environment around their fields or their house, wherever they are staying. So that is, I should say, a welcome step, that you are getting paid for the cleaner acts that you are undertaking at your level. So that's what I thought I'll just add to the discussion.
Yes. So creating markets for the benefit of the communities, so that not only the ecology is preserved, but the communities also get their
View.
life.
Yeah. So nature-based solutions are getting a lot of popularity at the global level, which is good.
Yeah. Shrikant, would you?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly just say a couple of points just to capture exactly what Dr. Vibha said. One, I think there's still a lot to be done and can be done from a bottom-up approach. I think the more examples and the more cases, such as the ones that Tobil indicated, are highlighted, it creates a necessary momentum and impetus to start building on those cases bottom up. But I also believe that there's a lot to learn in terms of scaled solutions from a macro level, particularly from countries like India and Bangladesh. I think there's an immediate need for a global South solution now, and I think some of the learnings from countries like India can benefit the rest of the world in terms of how you can fairly quickly scale up solutions that can benefit a large populations at fairly rapid pace.
So having both a macro and micro approach, and a global South solution. So I think now we can invite some questions from the audience. Yes.
That's it. Okay. Firstly, I think a huge thank you, because it's been one of. Oh. A huge thank you, because I think this has been one of the most interesting talks during this forum. Discussion's been so genuine. So, like we spoke about the disparity of well-being, both panelists spoke about it. You both spoke about it. Like today, this packaged water is our well-being, whereas back in the villages, the very need of water is well-being. So how we're already halfway into the UN SDGs. 2030 is just 7 years away, which is not too long. People think it's too long. How do we not let it become the next GDP? How does it not become? And even carbon, I think carbon in itself is not the greatest measurement. Like the global West can measure is carbon, global South measures by the deaths of climate catastrophe. So how do we not let the UN SDGs become the next, disparity module. And this is more of a worry we all share as opposed to a question. And going back to Tubil, I think, how can we scale up, modules of measurement that she's created? Like, how can we have more across the global smaller ones that fit regional contexts? So I'd love to hear more about that from you all, I think.
Who'd like to go first? Do you want to respond?
It's a very good question, but it's a very tough question. I wish if we knew the answer, we wouldn't be sitting here and having this conversation. I'll give you just my perspective and my belief. I have shifted from being absolutely optimistic, looking at macro level solutions, to becoming extremely cynical, expecting anything to happen in macro level. I'm right now at a stage where I have a little bit of a hope, but I'm completely committed to and believe in a bottom-up approach. I believe that the more we create cases from a bottom-up approach, the more momentum that we can build. It might take longer, but I think that the foundation needs to be built. And I think for that, there needs to be a lot more empowerment of communities. We're probably in the right time of our civilization in terms of that ability that we can, because there's technology and there's information that can be leveraged to build those bottom-up approaches right now. So.
Anyone else wants to add anything to it?
Yeah, I think I agree with what's just been shared. Obviously, I think I've made my point that I'm passionate about the bottom-up approach. I think that approach can be used at a macro level. You know what I'm saying? So one of the examples that we have is Makers Valley works very closely with a property developer. And this property developer, the way that they've built their ecosystem and all the tenants within are aligned to this community aspect. So they're realizing that commercial value of the property itself is really linked to the social value that they can create in this local grassroots community. Without the community buy-in, there's no value of this commercial property. And what we've been seeing in South Africa last year, July, we saw the worst protests by South Africans in protest of various properties. There was looting, the worst you've ever seen. It was on the news. There was just a huge uprising against commercial entities across South Africa, and it was scary. And I think the property developers and the people playing in that commercial space realized that if we don't have the buy-in of the people, we're going to lose at the end of the day. And so how do we adapt, even at the commercial level, the practices of building malls or building whatever you're going to build, residential, because now I'm speaking towards specifically the property sector. This organization that we worked with, this property developer, won an award by the ULI, which is the International Urban Land Institute, for gentrification without displacement. So what are the positive aspects of gentrification without looking at the negatives? They were able to achieve improving a community, but with actually the community at the heart and no displacement of the local people. And so this was such an interesting model. And what we learned through that, and the ULI has a beautiful report on this, is that the approach that urban property developers can take at wherever they're going is very similar, is using this bottom-up approach, making sure that the local stakeholders have a voice, are actually having a meaningful decision-making process and participation. So there's lots of different approaches that can be used at a macro level, and various property developers can use it. But once you use that approach, the local things are not going to be the same. What happens in this community, what they prioritize, what they speak to the property developer at that community might be different to a certain community. And then that's when you have to look at a micro level. You have to take what those people are saying is vital and important for them to heart. And so I think it's a combination. There's some things that you can use broadly and kind of scale, but you have to look at the granular things that are happening at a local level. That's when people feel that they are valued, they are heard, really heard, and also that there's trust. And I don't think we can move forward without trust. We're seeing a breakdown of trust across the globe, and we really need to look at that again. And that's where we look at building relationships at the local micro level first, and then it grows from there. So sorry, yeah, that's my little rant on that, but I just wanted to add to what's been said.
Anyone wants to ask anything else? Any more questions? So I think if you can just give one few words, just wrap it up. The final few words, Dr. Vibha.
Well, I'll say it is, as rightly said, involvement of the communities, what they need. It is and also give them skilling in green skilling. And I'll just share one example, like no amount of policing will stop if you are trying to say don't do the harvesting from the forest. But the moment you tell them how this harvesting is to be done and help them with the marketing of their produce, you are providing them with livelihood opportunities, you are increasing their income, and at the same time, you are ensuring that your forest survives. So, the skilling is a very important component. I'm not saying formal school education, I'm saying skilling of the techniques that they require on day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Tabil, last comment.
Yes, I just first of all want to say thank you so much once again for this opportunity. It's been really, really interesting conversation. I think what I would love to see in terms of our closing words, or what I'm really passionate about seeing and kind of encapsulates what we've been discussing, is the shift from us versus them. You know, there's a thing of like government versus people, private sector versus the people, to a we all approach. And I love our organization's name, Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We make it shorter by saying we all. This is about all of us together, government, private sector, people. We are all in this together. And that's the shift that I would like us to see when we are thinking about the way forward and the way that we work. It's about togetherness. And we really need to ensure that it's about the eco versus our egos.
Thank you, Tabil. And Shrikant, you have the last word.
Okay. What gets measured gets managed.
Thank you to all the panelists and the participants. Thank you.